I'm going to talk a little bit today about air missions in the Operational Combat series by the gamers. And in specific, I'm going to look at train busting, which is really the modern OCS euphemism for interdiction. I believe it is probably called train busting because it's mostly used to interdict railroad that will interfere with supply. However, it can be used against ground combat units also. But it's called train busting, even if there are no trains involved. So that's something to remember here. So to illustrate, what I'm showing here on the map is a map C from Guderian Blitzkrieg 2. I have the older version of that. And this is not a scenario. I've just set up like a hypothetical German attack against the Soviets. It's not really meant to be an optimal look at how to attack or how to defend or anything like that. It's only going to show the implications of a train busting mission and how useful it might be able to be. If you look at this map, you can see, a very small German line that's poised to attack the Soviets in this village that's in the center of this double rail line. You got some infantry there, and you also have some German 17th Panzer, which is a very powerful panzer division in reserve, at least at this stage. And there's a headquarters in the back there. And toward the top, you see some Luftwaffe air units. You've got a couple of fighters there and a couple of squadrons of tactical bombers. And when this movement's done here, but the air activities usually take place during movement. And so one of the concerns for the German attack here is toward the rear. In the backfield, the Soviets have some units in reserve. And these units could be very important because once the movement is done, the Soviet player will see kind of what the intention might be. And what they can do after the movement phase, there is a reaction phase. And during the reaction phase, among other things like using air units, the defender can release units that are in reserve. And they can move up to half their movement allowance. So in this case, you have some backfield reserve units that once it's clear where the Germans are going to attack, they can kind of change the landscape by popping their reserve marker and then moving into the line, and supporting these infantry units that are immediately under attack. So what can the German player do about this? Well, a couple of things. One, he can try to get that unit out of reserve. He could send some tactical bombers in there to bomb that reserve unit or units and try to pop their reserve marker. And they do this by getting a DG or better result, a disorganized or better result. The problem that they're going to have here, though, is if they fly some bombers in there, they don't have a spotter. In other words, there's no German unit adjacent to this reserve stack that could spot for this ground strike. So there's a penalty for that, probably simulating the fact that these bombers are going around. They think, there's a reserve group out here, but they don't know exactly where they are. There's no one spotting them. So they get a 3-column leftward shift on the table. So for example, if I sent that Stuka, which is a 12 bombardment factor unit, if you look on the chart, it would normally bomb on the 12 to 16 table, but I've now got to move that because there's no spotter 1, 2, 3 to the left, which puts it on the 3 to 4 column, which would mean that I would need at least a 9 to pop that reserve marker. So there's a good chance that that mission will be wasted. And that's even if it can get in there at full strength. If it gets intercepted by that fighter down at the bottom and aborts, well, then that's over. Or you know, that's a problem with that type of mission. The other thing is if it succumbs to flak and is reduced, it'll end up being knocked down to a 6 bombardment factor unit, which will put it on the worst possible column. You need 11 or 12. So that's not the most efficient mission, so I'm not going to do that. But there is still something I can do, and that is I could do a train busting mission. Now, that is a little bit different, but say that I take the Henschel 129 unit there. It's not a very powerful unit. It's only got a 5 bombardment strength. And say that I decide to go in there and bombard hex number, I don't know, 3025. And I'm going to hit that with a train busting or interdiction. Well, the effect of that is if it's successful, if those reserve units pop, their reserve marker during reaction phase, they're going to have their movement allowances damaged by that. If they're track or truck movement points, which they likely are, they're going to be affected in the hex of the attack plus the 6 surrounding hexes. And it's going to cost an additional movement point when they enter any of those hexes. So that is a very good proposition because it might be enough to cut their movement points down so they can't get to where they want to go. Maybe even to the point where the Soviet player decides not even to release them. So let's take a little bit closer look at how this might work. And what you see here, this is where I want to bring my Henschel 129s in. They have a 5 factor for bombardment. So I want to lay some interdiction down here. And so what are the issues that could come up? Well, number one, you see on the other picture that there was a Soviet fighter squadron, a squadron of Lag 3s in the southern part of the picture of the map. And these could actually do a direct interception if I go try to do that. And that would immediately result in air-to-air combat. Of course, one of the problems with doing this, there's a couple for the Soviet player. The air-to-air factor on the Henschel 129s is pretty good. It's a 2, it's parenthesized, so it can't be the offensive guy, but it can defend itself really well. And you'll notice the air-to-air combat factor on the Lag 3s is also a 2. So this is kind of an even-up fight, but there's a good chance that I could fly in there and abort that flight of Henschel 129s, and that would ruin the plans for interdiction. I might even put some losses on it, but I might take some losses myself. But in any event, I go back to my base and become inactive. So if the Germans have any more tactical air, they'll be able to fly, unmolested. So that's not how I usually do defensive air. I like to set up patrol zones and not do direct interceptions. And the way that's done is this Lag 3 air unit in the south has a patrol zone that goes out from its base of 10 hexes. And it goes all the way up to that headquarters. It's right on the edge of its tenuous line, but the hex that I want to interdict as the Germans is in the patrol zone. So I don't have to go launch a direct interception. I can just let the natural course of this unit flying patrols from time to time have an effect on those Henschels. And the way it has the effect is when the Henschels fly in there to do the train busting, they have to pass a flak die roll. And if they're doing this in a patrol zone, they're going to have negative modifiers, which might cause them to be hit and reduced to their reduced side. And they'll be less effective when they go through with their mission. So that's what I've elected to do here. But the Luftwaffe isn't done here. They want to launch that mission. However, they have decided that they're going to do a fighter sweep, and they're going to try to take down that patrol zone altogether. And the way they do this is by taking one of their squadrons of BF-109. So they've got some Messerschmitts there, and they're going to do a fighter sweep against that base. So they fly the Messerschmitts down to the Lag 3s, and the Lag 3s have to fight them. And you can see that the German aircraft have an advantage. Their air-to-air is a 4 versus the Lag 3's rating of 2. And so the way this works is there's an air-to-air combat table, which you have to roll on. You just roll 2d6, you add the attacker's air-to-air rating, then you subtract the defender's air-to-air rating, and then you get your result. So you can see the table here. So I'm going to imagine that I roll a 7, which normally both would abort, which means that I would effectively take the air net down, but possibly take some losses, and I would have to abort those Messerschmitts. But in this case, I didn't add in the modifiers yet. So I get a 7. I add 4 for the Messerschmitts air-to-air rating, so that brings it up to an 11. But then I subtract 2 for the Lag 3's air-to-air rating. It brings it down to a 9. But on the table, you see defender aborts. So the defender has to abort and then roll for losses. But regardless of whether they have losses or not, they're inactive for the rest of the turn. And the BF-109s fly back to base, and they also become inactive. But now there's no patrol zone. And that will be important when these Henschel 129s go in to do their train busting mission, especially when they have to survive the enemy flak roll. So let's take a look at that. So as you can see in the picture, the air unit's there now, but before it can do its train busting mission, its interdiction, it needs to do a flak roll. And it's going to roll 2 dice, and if it's an 11 or 12, they're going to have to flip the unit to its reduced side. That means it took flak damage of some sort. So there's a number of modifiers. One is if you send a very large mission of 3 or more air units, they're more likely to be spotted, so that's a problem. But in this case, it's just the 1 squadron, so there's no modifier for that. The target hex does not have a headquarters, because headquarters have a lot of flak to defend them, but there is none. There's no air base here, so there's no modifier for an air base with flak, and there's no on-map flak value printed in this hex. It's basically just a track hex. Well, now notice on the chart, if the target is in an enemy patrol zone. So imagine I didn't do that fighter sweep. Well, does my mission have at least 1 fighter? No. I sent the bombers out naked. So the mission has no fighters. That would be a +2 modifier. And then is the mission train busing? Yep. So that's another +1. So that's a +3 modifier. So imagine I roll an 8. If I roll an 8 and I had to add these modifiers from the enemy patrol zone, I would have a flak result, and my Henschels would be turned over to their reduced side. But because I took that enemy patrol zone down with that fighter sweep, none of these modifiers apply. So my 8 stands as an 8, and they're not damaged. So now they can do their train busting mission. Now that's done on the barrage versus facility table. So if you can send a ground mission in, you could hit an air base to try to reduce its capacity and destroy some of the aircraft at it. Or you could hit a port and try to reduce the capacity of the port to take supply and to manage things. And the third thing that you can do is train busting to disrupt the movement of ground units or supply coming in. So I have these Henschels are a 5 bombardment factor. So if you look on the table, it falls on the 5 to 10 table. And you can see the asterisk results, 4, 5, or 6, would be a successful train busting mission. So in my hypothetical turn here, I roll the dice, I get a 4, that's a hit. I can put an interdiction or a train busting marker down in that hex. Now my Henschels fly back to base and become inactive. What are the implications of this? Well, what we see here, I take the reserve marker off my stack here, and you can see I've got the 9th Tank Brigade and the 36th Motorcycle Unit and Battalion. And because it's reaction, they have half their movement points normally. So you can see the 9th tank has got 14 track movement points. And it's halved, so it's 7. It can move, when it moves into that first hex, it's half because it's a track, but it's 1.5 because it's in the interdiction zone. So it's 1.5 to actually move this first hex. Then it goes along the track, and it's another half plus 1 because it's an interdiction zone. So that's 3. Then it moves to 29.25. That's 4.5. Then it moves into the woods to 28.25. That's 6.5. It doesn't have enough movement points to get to the unit that I want to get it with, the 182nd Division. It has to stop. So that if I release it from reserve, this is as far as it can get. It can cover the backfield a little bit, but it can't get into the hex I'm going to attack. Well, what about the motorcycle unit? Well, you notice that's a 16 truck movement points. So that means it has 8 points in reaction. And so it too, it's going to move 1.5 into the first hex because of the interdiction, 3 into the interdiction hex, then 4.5 into 29.25. And now for trucks, it's 3 movement points to move into the woods. So that's 7.5, and that is where it also has to stop. It can't get any further. So neither of these units, because of the interdiction, can get into the front lines to help, add some weight to the defense. They can only get in the back, a little bit closer in the backfield. So the Soviet might not even release these guys from reserve. I mean, it's hard to say what they're going to do with them, but that shows you the power of that mission. So now I'm going to show a little bit of how train busting is often used, and that's to disrupt supply. So this Soviet headquarters on the map here, we're going to presume he's drawing supply from the city of Orel. And so that's just about 5 truck movement points back, and that's how far he can draw. So any supply that the Soviets get that want to support this headquarters, they got to get it into Orel. And they do that by using rail movement. So for the sake of argument, we're going to say in this game that the Soviets have a rail cap of 2 per turn. So that means they basically can move 2 regimental equivalents or 2 SPs, supply points, along the rail per turn. So I could move 2 SPs from the dump in the rear area to Orel, where it can support the headquarters. But you may have noticed that this is a double rail line, a multi-rail line. So actually the capacity, it can carry double. So I can actually, with a 2 rail cap, can carry 4 SP to Orel. So, that really gives the Soviet headquarters some significant advantages in being able to fight and have the supplies. So what I might want to do as the Luftwaffe is lay down some train busting. And so here I've sent a Ju-87 Stuka out, and you can see on the map. And if I have a successful train busting mission here, well, when it's the Soviets' turn to move supply, it's going to cut his rail cap in half. Now, he is still using a double railroad. So, he's got a rail cap of 2, but if I'm moving supply through there, through that interdiction marker, it's just going to cut the rail cap down to, 1. But because it's a double rail, 2. So the end result is, because of this interdiction, instead of getting 4 SPs in, the best I can do is get 2. So I've cut the Soviet supply, capabilities in half for this turn simply by laying down some train busting. Anyway, that gives you a little bit more of a look inside of some of the interactions of train busting and interdiction in the Operational Combat series. I hope you enjoyed.